My name's Lucy Farrow and I am a PhD candidate at the University of New England. I am technically a zoologist, but my research interests are in neuroethology. So I'm interested in understanding animal behaviour and how animals interact with their environment, and whether or not it's kind of based on how big their brains are or how many neurons they have in their brains, or what it really is about them that makes them unique. My interest kind of stemmed from being a little girl and watching Dr. Dolittle and how he could talk to animals, and I thought what a wonderful opportunity that would be to just have a job where I could talk to animals all day. You could probably tell I'm the youngest of 7, so I was often the one that was left to play with the animals. And then obviously as I got older, I realised that's not really the way it works. But you can learn animal vocalizations from watching them, watching how they interact with one another. And you can start to almost speak their language and ask questions and let them answer it for you. Well, they're good. I don't care what anyone tells you. So noisy miners are a native honeyeater to Australia. So they like to live on the east coast of Australia, all the way down to Tasmania. They are a grey honeyeater with a beautiful yellow eye patch around their eyes that they can increase or decrease depending, there's one calling now, depending on what sort of signal they're trying to send. So they vocally communicate, visually communicate, but people usually get them confused with the common miner, which is an introduced miner, completely different. So noisy miners are M-I-N-E-R, common miners are M-Y-N-A. They have a different sort of lifestyle. So common miners are bad because they're introduced from Asia and they actually nest in hollows. And so what they'll do is they'll find a lovely nest that a galar's made in a hollow and pull the galar, the babies out, and then take over that nest. Whereas noisy miners build their own little nests. So they built stick nests that are a nice little neat one, and they will cooperate to protect the young in that nest. They nest all the time, particularly in the Armidale regions. So they do generally have the springtime nesting period, but what we've found around here is they will just breed as long as resources are good. They'll keep going. The beauty about their sort of social arrangement is you have one female, and the female will have a territory, and she'll have multiple males that help her to feed, forage, protect the territory, and if she has young, multiple males will help her feed those young. So they're not as restricted as other birds that might need to find a mate. Then they have to do courtship, get the mate to love them, build a nest, and then keep the nest successful. Noisy miners just keep it all year round. They're a little bit promiscuous, so there's not a monogamous male-female dominant bond. It's a female and she might have one male for one nest, and then the following nest might be a different male. And that's how she kind of encourages the males to help, because they're not sure who the father is. So they just feed her and keep the genetic investment going. In Australia, we're really lucky because we have a lot of honeyeaters, and they're the really pretty birds. They're usually like your parrots. But the problem is honeyeaters by nature are more aggressive. That's because nectar is a limited resource. If you visit a flower, it's not going to grow more nectar within the next day. So they'll feed on nectar. But even though they have a specialised tongue that assists them with that, they will feed on anything. So I feed them Madeira cake, they drink milk, they will eat anything possible. So they're not like some birds that are really specialist and they will only, such as mistletoe birds, they will only feed on mistletoe buds. Noisy miners will eat pretty much anything. They naturally live in eucalyptus woodlands near sources of water. Eucalyptus, because that's what their natural diet is nectar from the flowers, but they don't like understory. So what we see in a woodland like this, where there's not a lot of understory to it, it's prime habitat for them. So what you see with a lot of birds is they will avoid the edge of forests, because that's usually where the danger zone is. So that's where you might have goshawks that like to fly in and catch birds. Noisy miners love the edges of forest. That's their ideal habitat. So understory is things like your blackberry bush. So anything that's kind of small and shrubby. Grasses can also count as understory, just so it's not a nice, clean sort of patch of grass like what you get in parks. And the reason that's important is noisy miners walk. And so if you have all tangled sort of understory, they can't walk on the understory. So it kind of just naturally prevents them from being there. Here at Jumeric Dam, it's the perfect habitat for noisy miners for two reasons. One is we have open woodland that's on the boundary of a nice source of water. The other benefit is we've turned the centre of the woodland or near the woodland into a park. So going back to the noisy miners adapting to different habitats, parks are perfect for them because you have kids eating cake, so they can go in and steal some cake when they need to. You have an open grassland so they can forage naturally for insects, whatever they want to forage. There's also other birds that they have a sort of eavesdropping relationship with. So birds like your butcher birds that also inhabit parks, when they alarm calls, noisy miners know what they're saying and they can kind of respond that way as well. Noisy miners have a really extensive vocal repertoire and they communicate about predators, food, ask each other where they are. They'll do constant contact calls. And even though you can kind of hear some construction work going on or some anthropomorphic noise, so maybe cars pulling into the car park, there's actually evidence showing that noisy miners will adjust the frequency of their vocalizations based on what's going on around them. Because noisy miners are so angry all the time, the guarantee way to bring them in so they can be a little bit in front of the camera and show off a little is give them a model of a snake or a predator and play back alarm calls that will actually bring them to the area, and then when they see the predator they'll hopefully respond. When we think about humans being around, we think about the negative impacts, so maybe more roadkill or just disturbance, but there's benefits to having humans around. Things like foxes won't come near humans, so the birds are pretty comfortable that when they're foraging they're going to be protected, and they also know that that's a food source. They look at us and they see a giant piece of food that is going to become available. So this site's pretty important, not just to my research, but to our lab as a whole. So the Animal Behaviour Ecology Laboratory, we do a lot of work with noisy miners and kind of trying to understand how they interact with humans and how they adapt with humans. So I've done my honours at Jumeric Dam at a colony here, looking at their vocal repertoires, because it was the perfect opportunity to test their alarm system. So at the time we weren't sure if they had different alarm calls for different predator types, and I knew by coming here, do we have humans around who bring dogs in, and dogs are not a friend of noisy miners, so that's a terrestrial threat. And also because we have the water body there, we also have a lot of raptors that like to fly over, particularly goshawks like areas like this. So it was a good opportunity to kind of watch, see if a predator's in the environment, whether it's natural or if I've brought in a snake or a raptor model, and see what alarm call they produce. And we found that they do have a terrestrial alarm call called a chur call for things that are on the ground, or a raptor that's perched in a tree. But as soon as that raptor takes flight, they'll switch to an aerial alarm call. So it goes from someone help me to everyone go, 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 go. My research started off being purely field research, where I was recording vocalizations in the field and then just playing them back to the birds in the field and seeing what sort of response I got. Problem with that is they get distracted. You're trying to play them back a call and they see a friend on the other tree that they want to go see instead. So we took the methods we wanted to use in the field, and we caught the birds using a mist net, which is like a big stocking that you hang up and the birds fly into it and then you catch them. And we brought them into the lab and actually put them in sound booths, so we know that they are listening to the vocalizations we're trying to get them to listen to, and we play back calls. What I was interested in is head turn. Where are they looking when they hear the call? How long are they looking for? Do they call back depending on who's calling? And that allowed us to see that they're capable of recognizing who's actually talking to them, and if they know them or if they don't know them. which is very unique. We take it for granted. We know what someone sounds like. I could tell if my mum was angry just by her tone. So to have an animal that's capable of recognizing individuals, even in high stress times, it's really quite unique and quite complex. So from there, I decided I wanted to focus my PhD on going, okay, we have a bird here that's adapting to rapid changes, that's capable of recognizing familiar birds from unfamiliar birds. What is it about its brain that's allowing it to do that when we have other birds that are actually suffering from anthropomorphic changes? And so that means we take the birds into the lab. I get to do really fun stuff like put them in mazes and see how long it takes them to finish the maze. Compare that to rats, because rats are known for being amazing at finding holes and finding food and remembering where the food is. So getting to do fun stuff like that, and also interesting work looking at their actual brains. What sort of brain do they have? Is it big? We do a process called homogenization, which is where we smush the brain up, make a smoothie, as grim as it sounds, and we put a dye in the smoothie that lets the computer tell us how many neurons are in that brain. And it's really important because at the moment in animal studies, it's believed the bigger brain you have, the smarter you are as an animal. But we look at birds and they don't have very big brains, but they can use tools and communicate just the same way that primates do. So the thinking is when they evolved for flight, they just kind of shrunk their brain a little bit and put more neurons in there, and that lets them maintain.